and welcome to the Power Summit 2021. The name of the session today is EU ETS Reform, One Step at a Time. My name is Andre Marcoux. I'll be the moderator of the session today. And we'll have a discussion about a number of very important developments that we expect to happen very shortly in the proposal that the European Commission is going to put forward for in June 2021 or the beginning of July. Now, I would like to start by introducing the panelists because we have a very eminent panel with some very interesting presentations. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Uniper for sponsoring the session and welcoming David Bryson, the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer. I have to say, David, that I have been in the power industry for a long time, and it's circa 1993 when Maurice Strong came back from Rio de Janeiro to run Ontario Hydro, the first time we had a sustainability officer in a power company. So seeing you as the Chief Sustainability Officer, it's quite refreshing and very happy to see that. And thank you very much for integrating climate change challenge in the operation of day-to-day of Uniper. Second, I would like to introduce Bea Jordi. He is the Director in DG Action, Climate Action, leading the team responsible for the EU emission trading system, promoting carbon pricing and advancing innovation opportunities and competitiveness. Bea is specialized in fundamental physics at the University of Santiago de Compostela. Next would be Emma Pinchback, who is the Chief Executive of Energy UK. She is an expert in whole economy decarbonization and energy transition. Prior to this, Emma was the head of climate change at WWF UK, and she has an MA from Oxford. Last but not least, Georgios Stasis, President and CEO of PPCSA, which he joined in 2019. Prior to this, Georgios had quite extensive experience in the power industry, and especially in the renewable area of the power industry, running a significant part of the NL operations on the green NL Green Power. Very welcome to all of you. I cannot emphasize more the importance of the discussion that we have today. The ETS continues to be one of the important pieces of the decarbonization tools for the EU, for the European Union. It is not the only one, but the price signal is what we hope that we all decarbonize, and has come a long way since the days when it was €5 a ton. It's now €5.50 a ton, and going strong. The signals are unmistakable. I remember many years ago, somebody told me, I don't know what the price of carbon will be, but it's not going to be zero. And it's not zero, it's 50. That was when I took over AIDA in 1999. Now, I will start by inviting Mr. Bryson first to give us the welcome address and the keynote speech. Mr. Bryson, please.
Thank you very much, Andre. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure for me to open this discussion on the review of the EU emissions trading system. We at Uniper have always regarded the EU ETS as the flagship policy towards achieving Europe's climate objectives in a cost-effective manner. And we, the Fortum Uniper Group, therefore support an ambitious reform of the EU carbon market. This reform goes hand in hand with our own decarbonisation strategy, which I would like to briefly touch upon. As we fully support the EU's climate and energy targets, we've pledged to turn our power generation portfolio in Europe carbon neutral by 2035. And in addition, on the way to that, our carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. Now, over the next years, we'll invest approximately €1.2 billion in low carbon and CO2 efficient technologies by firstly enabling renewable energy projects. We're currently an off-taker under long-term purchase agreements, and we will grow that to around 5 terawatt hours of renewables contracted per annum. We will also enlarge our renewables portfolio. We plan to add 1 gig of capacity in the short term to 2025 and increase this to 3 gigawatts in the medium term thereafter. Secondly, and very importantly for us, renewable and decarbonised gases, such as renewable and low carbon hydrogen, hydrogen carriers, as well as biogas and biomethane, are an integral part of decarbonising not only our fleet, but also providing solutions for our customers in hard to abate sectors. And that's important for us, given that we're one of Europe's largest gas midstream players. And thirdly, and importantly, we will further leverage our existing hydropower assets. We have around 13 terawatt hours per annum in Sweden and Germany of carbon-free, renewable and non-intermittent energy. But for these investments to materialise, a strong and stable EU ETS is needed. So from our perspective, the EU ETS's scope should be expanded gradually to ensure and preserve the integrity and stability of the system. The linear reduction factor should be increased, together with a one-off reduction rebasing to secure higher ambition within the EU ETS. And the review of the market stability reserve should, in our view, foresee a continued stable intake rate of 24%, combined with lower intervention thresholds to safeguard the stability of the system. No doubt some form of carbon border adjustment mechanisms may be needed to deal with carbon leakage risk for certain sectors in order to secure Europe's industrial base. But we need to keep a global view in mind at all times. And therefore, linking of schemes will become more and more important if we are to tackle the issue of climate change. And I think very much like Emma, I hope that we can start with the European Union and United Kingdom in this regard. This is a very exciting topic, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So I'll hand over now back to you, Andre, and I look forward to hearing everybody else's views.
Thank you very much, David. Quite a call to arms in your opening remarks, and now we're going to go in and do a tour de table with a number of questions. The first question that I would go to, and I will go in the order of Bea, then Emma, and Georgios, and back to you, David. So just to the carousel. How ambitious should the reform of the UTS be? Bea, people talk about, is this going to be a revolution? Is this going to be a revolution? What is it going to be? What are the expectations? A lot of people are quite reading the tea leaves in Brussels currently.
Thanks a lot, Andre, and pleasure to be with you, David, and Emma and Georgios. I don't know, Andre, when you present me, you said I was the director. I still are. I'm still, I hope I'm not fired after this panel. So just on how ambitious the ETS should be, let me just put that we are in a general ambition in Europe, and I will say in a good part of the world, which is fantastic. This Commission has a clear mandate with the Green Deal, and we will be at that level of ambition, which is a high ambition, but reasonable in the sense that it makes sense from an economic point of view and from a social point of view. So we will follow the minus 55% for 2030, that, as you know, has been reflected in a political agreement in the climate law that I'm very happy to confirm, that it was last month agreed by European Parliament and Council. So we will be on that level. This means that for ETS, we will be at around the minus 62% of reduction in the ETS. And the answer is this a revolution? I think the revolution, we have it in the last 4 years, that we have been moving from a price of €5 to 50 euros, and it's not the signal, the price. The signal is that last year, and I will mention also the previous years, because last year was a tough year for everybody, but the previous year, so the emissions in 2019, they were reduced 9% in Europe, and the linear reduction factor was 1.7 at that time. So there is happening this decarbonization. Clearly, the leader is the power sector, and a big bravo to the power sector for this revolution that has been led by initiative, but also carbon pricing and renewable policy. Let's be clear that it's not alone. Last year, the numbers are minus 13% global European emissions in the ETS, with the power sector in minus 15. The industry has reduced more, but of course we need to put it in a context of unfortunate crisis. So how ambitious will be? The other absolutely in line with the minus 55 that we will become is the line to become carbon neutral in 2050. It will be to continue the revolution, I will say. I cannot put more details of linear reduction factor, or rebasing, or mechanism, because as you know, we will present our package that now has been confirmed for the 14th of July. And just a caveat that this 14th of July is nothing to be with a delay in ambition. It's just the absorption capacity and the hyperactivity we are having in the Commission and in the College. So ambition, clear answer, in line of the minus 55%, in line with a carbon neutrality for 2050.
Well, Bear, the only thing is, apologies, a slip of tongue is not a Freudian slip, it's a slip of tongue, but Bastille Day could be also interpreted as the Revolution Day, so that's why that where the question was. You putting it out on Bastille Day. But let me go back to Emma. Emma, the same question to you. How should how ambitious should the reform be? The ambition goes in many directions. Certainly, one of them is the level of ambition as we define it normally in terms of the targets, but there are others.
I'll keep this brief and probably violently agree with what has already been said, in that carbon pricing is a tool. It's not where the ambition is going to be set. The ambition has been set in the climate law and in the Green New Deal and in the broader range of policies for, from renewables to emissions performance standards and the rest. And the ambition is very clear. So the reforms need to deliver against the 55% target for 2030 and the net zero target for 2050. More broadly, though, I think with the EU ETS being the world's most established carbon market, there is a job to do with these reforms to demonstrate that carbon pricing is an effective, robust tool as part of the suite of measures we have available to us to do decarbonisation. And that is particularly critical in a COP year where we know that carbon pricing will be one of the things being discussed. So I think there are two objectives for the reforms. One, deliver on the targets, and two, make sure that the carbon price is stable and continues to perform.
Thank you, Emma. Georgios?
Well, good afternoon also from my side. It's very nice to be with all of you today discussing this very important matter. I think we need to have a clear understanding of where we stand today. 2021, no matter if we are still in the pandemic, will be a year which might go above the 2014 peaks in terms of CO2 emissions, no matter if aviation is not back, no matter if life in general is not back as we knew it before the pandemic. Climate action announcements at the United States President Biden's Leader Summit on climate, together with those announced since September last year, have improved the warming estimate by 0.2 degrees Celsius as per the climate action trackers. End of century warming from these Paris Agreement pledges and targets is now estimated to be at 2.4 degrees Celsius. While all of those developments are welcome, warming based on the targets and pledges, even under the most optimistic assumptions, is still well above the Paris Agreement 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature limit. In fact, the delta to reach the target by 2030 is around we need around an extra reduction of 20 to 23 gigatons of CO2 emissions. So we have a huge step to take further. We don't have time. We need to act. We need to take brave decisions this year in COP26. At PPCR annual emissions pledge in 2020 due to the combination of a lower power demand and our predefined coal phase-out program. In 2019, we have put in place a new business plan with the fastest lignite phase-out plan in Europe and a very big investment in renewables too. We are shutting down all operational lignite assets by end of 2023. For quite a few years, the company was following a delay strategy, which did not bring the necessary results. Instead of delaying, we decided to take a leadership role and transform our company towards the energy transition to a more sustainable future. This accelerated plan was in fact the result of the ETS market functioning to date. As a result, we will be reducing our CO2 emissions by more than 60% by 2023. But as we are moving away from a fossil fuels heavy portfolio towards renewables, we believe that our exposure to carbon prices will be increasingly limited, at least for the more mature technologies, as more mature technologies enter. But as I said before, obviously this is a global effort, and the effort to date is still not enough. We need to go much faster, lots to do, and we don't have more time. So we need to be very ambitious. We need to add sectors. Countries need to be added on the scheme. We need to keep the market stability reserve tight for the years to come.
Thank you, Georgios. And yes, we all noted with and follows quite a lot of interest the efforts that you and the steps that you've taken into moving the company into very, very new ground and very new directions. Going now back to the ETS and the role that it has played and continue to play a crucial role in sending the necessary signal for decarbonization for electricity sector. Now, what other sectors should be considered? There's been talk in Brussels about a number of sectors. I think the inception impact assessment, the public consultation talks about a number of sectors. What sector should be considered for a carbon market? How should we go about doing this? Do we jump in the pool or should create a parallel pool first and link to the ETS as a second step? How do we anticipate to do this and what sectors are really up for bat? Bea, you want to start, please?
Thanks a lot, Andrei. Well, the extension is not a secret that in the Green Deal in 2019, the Commission mentioned carbon pricing is a good instrument, and I fully agree with Emma that it is an instrument. Let's do not confuse objectives with instrument, and it's working now. So what about to extend into other sectors? So maritime is a number one choice. Maritime has been outside any pricing, taxation. So even if it's small in terms of emissions, it's a key industrial sector and with a lot of reflecting the trade activity of the union. So maritime is one of them. And then, and I think that there's a kind of agreement from everybody that this should be done. Otherwise, other questions is how we handle the global or the international aspects on that. And this is another debate. But the other sectors is what about building and transport? Building and transport, even if they have been doing efforts from 2014 to 2018, transport has increased 6% in emissions, building has increased in 3%. So these are the other two natural candidates. One thing that has created, and I would like to clarify, is created a lot of noise is that is this possible extension to carbon pricing demolishing all other regulatory instruments? Is it demolishing member states' local action? And this is an important principle for us. And let me clarify from the Commission: no backsliding on other regulatory measures. So if carbon pricing is covering or building and transport are covered by carbon pricing and ETS, it will mean that we are keeping or enlarging and enforcing the other regulatory measures. The stability that it was mentioned by David and also by Emma, the stability will be an important principle in this possible extension. It will be not very wise that an ETS on power industry and aviation that is working and giving the correct signals that we disturb this market. So the wise approach would be, and this we will put it on the table in July, but is that the system should not disturb each other. So building and transport is a big sector. It will be starting. It took us years to fine-tune our power and industry ETS. So let's do not put the system upside down. So this stability is important. The regulatory compatibility I also mentioned, and this is why our package in July, let me make a little bit of publicity, will also include effort sharing, will also include renewables, energy efficiency, CO2 standards that it will be reinforced and more. And last point, Andre, from my side, is that this extension to building and transport, we are fully aware that it will have social implications. So the carbon pricing design needs to include how we tackle these social implications and fairness approach to this extension.
One step or two steps, Bea?
Well, depends on how you define the steps. Let me be Galician. I come from the northwest of Spain, and we normally answer with the questions when you ask us a question. So it depends how you define the steps. I think that we will present it in July, but I think that there is a good common view in the Commission that a different system should be settled. And what is important is that this system becomes solid, stable, and gives the good signal. A possible merge for the future, on verra. You will need to wait for July. You will need to wait for July, Andre.
Whatever will be, will be. Emma?
So I think in general, we support the consideration of putting a carbon price on other areas of the economy. You know, we have to decarbonise every sector by 2050, and it's sensible to learn the lessons of power, where carbon pricing has been one effective tool. So I don't think we're against the idea, and there are similar conversations happening in the UK with our own ETS as well as with the EU ETS. That said, the EU ETS is working as an effective tool to continue to decarbonise power. So, as you said, we don't want to see that disrupted. And therefore, a parallel market seems to be the sensible way to bring other sectors in. And that gives us time to evaluate whether it's appropriate for those sectors and make adjustments before they go into the pool. The other thing to say is not every sector is going to be suitable for an ETS. They might be suitable for carbon pricing, but probably it's going to be like power, where it's a mix of regulation and incentives and a carbon price. And if we think about, for example, the coal phase out, that has been, as George just mentioned, that has been delivered by the ETS, but also by emissions performance standards, effective markets to bring forward renewables, and other regulatory measures locally. And I think we need to have that in mind as we move into other areas of the economy, that it would be very similar. In terms of which sectors, I'd like to make a plea to consider negative emissions. There's a lot of discussion about the robustness of negative emissions, and we think it might be worth looking at including robust negative emissions in an ETS if we're looking at other sectors. And the other thing to note on buildings and heat is, of course, that other sectors may move into the ETS by virtue of being part of an expanded electrification and kind of power sector in their own right, without having to change the mechanism. So as we electrify other areas of the economy, they'll be caught by the ETS anyway. So we're thinking about that. And then lastly, we're going to talk about linkage later. And I am painfully aware from discussions in the UK that if we want to link global carbon markets, we need to make sure that we're developing them in discussion and tandem with both the global industry and other countries, because the more synergistic these markets are, the more they're alike, the easier it is to link. So just having that in mind as we develop our regulations in Europe.
Thank you, Emma. Georgios, from your point of view, I think that call clearly a direction that you're not moving in. But what other sectors, coal, negative emissions, certainly something that Emma is bringing in. What's your view? Are these three sectors that Bea mentioned additional sectors that you may want to consider?
Well, I agree with Bea and Emma on what they said. Maritime is a clear candidate, aviation as well. I mean, today more than 95% of industrial emissions, about half of emissions from aviation, are currently covered by free emissions allowance. Free allocation of allowances to sectors like industry and aviation could slow decarbonization and need a better targeting. The trading scheme must provide a robust carbon signal, thereby creating an incentive for emission reductions. EUAs will continue anyhow to increase as allowances continue to be withdrawn into the market stability reserve, and the fuel switching potential across Europe is exhausted. Eventually, we need to create a global carbon price too. So we need to add more schemes, more sectors, and more countries too as well.
Thanks, Georgios. David, you touched upon this, but where did Uniper come from on this in terms of additional sectors? How do we do this? Do we jump into the pool, or do we do a tango?
Yeah, tango is a very nice dance, isn't it, Andre? I think, and I think what's really important with the next steps that we take is that we target those areas where we really think we can have an impact, and we should be really thinking about the carbon reduction and the targets that we have. So I think the first point that was made really well by Pia and by Emma is that this isn't, the ETS isn't the target setting. This is the lever that we need to use, and we have to remember that at all times. So it needs to respond to the ambition levels, and therefore, but also need to recognise that stability is needed. So whatever we do now, we need to keep stability, I think, through this next period, through to 2030, to achieve the stability that companies need to invest. I think that's really quite important. I fully agree with the sectors that we could move into. I think that the maritime and particularly in terms of road transport, heavy goods vehicles and moving of goods around the continent, for example, and also heating are areas where we should definitely focus, because there's opportunity there. But I also agree, and I'm afraid I'm not disagreeing with anybody here, I think, that actually we need to think about this very carefully. We don't want to destabilise what we've got at the moment, which has worked so effectively as a scheme. So I think running parallel schemes is important, potentially running pilots initially in those areas to make certain we achieve the right effects. There are real detailed topics, aren't there, such as monitoring, verification, that need to be properly understood, how that can be applied in different sectors for us to be able to effectively run a scheme. So taking this, if you like, in this two-step approach, if you like, or if you like a parallel approach, I think for me is a way forward, because by doing that, we stabilise what we've got, continue on our journey, and then bring others with us. And at a later point in time, clearly, hopefully we can bring that together. But just an example, I mean, we reckon that if you just take grey hydrogen as a topic, and that sits within the industrial sector, obviously, and is covered, but we think that would need something like 200 to 300 euros a tonne to really move out of grey hydrogen. And we have, I think, 230 terawatt hours of grey hydrogen used in process industries in Europe now. That's a huge, huge challenge to move away. So I think this was also mentioned by perhaps Emma. The EU ETS is one of our levers. We have a number of levers that we need to use. So incentives, schemes that the EU has come up with, such as IPSAs, these topics are all very important levers that come together to achieve the change that we need. And certainly that's something we have to remember. We need to use the tool of EU ETS along with others to deliver the change that we desire.
Thanks, David. Let me come back now to a little bit more focused and more pointed question, going back to Bea first. Great. Look, I've been in this business of emissions trading, carbon prices, believe it or not, since 1995. It's a long way. Maybe it's time to kind of hang our boots up. But nevertheless, prices are in dreamland. They're at 50 euros a ton. We've been arguing for this for a long time. We got 50 euros a ton. There is the reality that this is helping and driving the power industry, whether it's switch or deployment, whatever it may be. But it is also affecting industrial Europe. And it's quite clear that we are here to keep an industrial Europe. In the end, David, Emma, Georgios, they're your customers. So do you need them? We need them for prosperity. So the risk of carbon leakage at 5 may not have been great. At 50 is becoming to be very, very real. So how do we deal with this? The risk of carbon leakage, we're dealing with free allocation. How do we deal with it in the future? Do we keep free allocation the CBAM is something that is being put forward as the new silver bullet. How do we do this? What are the parameters? What are the ways that these two approaches interact? How do we move from one to the other? Do we move from one to the other? Bea, do you want to give us some ideas how this is being looked at right now, or what is some of the thinking behind it?
With pleasure. I think that I don't know if it probably in the second part of the panel discussions we will be less aligned, because I have to say that I'm really aligned with Georgios, with Emma, with David. But just on carbon leakage, well, let's put it in the global context. I mean, decarbonization needs to be set up in a global context. So we have a pledge for our carbon neutrality. Great news from the States on new pledges, but not only. I mean, major economies, China and South Korea and Canada. So I will not make the list, but there's getting this club of carbon neutrality and moving on. That is fantastic. And of course, UK. So it is an international arena. We like it or not. And personally, I like it. So we have done our pledge, but as previous president used to say, we are nice but not innocent. So we need to also consider everybody dynamism and everybody objective. This is why the carbon leakage was set up. And it has been a protection on against unfairness in the climate arena. And as you know very well, in the phase four meaning January 2021, we have targets, focus, and reduce the free allocation. So we have adapted more to real trade risk distortion. So the question is that sufficient progress all over the world now that we can just take out free allocation? And in our opinion, there's still a reason for going on with free allocation in a more target manner, and taking into consideration also the global ambition. We have put the CBAM on the table, which is a fairness in this path of trade fairness, and we will need to combine both. Of course, we cannot have both systems at the same place, and we will do a proper interaction, if I could be a policy maker, a proper interaction of the two mechanisms, meaning that the sectors that we will put on the table of CBAM at the same time, as you know, we are putting both ETS reform or strengthening together with the CBAM proposal on the table. They will need to interact in a manner that those sectors chosen in the CBAM for different reasons, and part of these reasons has been in our dialogue with industry and with international markets, that we take out a free allocation. So this is a little bit, it's a global debate. It's not an European debate. It's a world debate, and we think that we need to industries engaging in this green revolution, which is great. We will need to help them with these signals, taxonomy, funding, recovery plan, 37% of all the recovery plan to climate. So big financing discussion to accompany them, but free allocation will need to be adapted to the new situation and combined with CBAM in a proper manner.
I will resist to make this, there's a love-hate relationship in Brussels around the EU, and people who do this stuff with the ETS, even in the days of the 5 years at Ton, they couldn't stop talking about ETS. Now they can't stop talking about CBAM, but this is an ETS session. This is not the CBAM session. So therefore, I will go on to Emma and talk about another topic, which was quite fascinating. It's not unrelated to CBAM, as a matter of fact. Sorry to say this, Emma, but we did talk to quite a few stakeholders in Brussels and people who have operations in the UK, people that are preoccupied with what's going to happen now. And we talk about what is the UK going to do? Is there going to be a CBAM? What's the UK going to do? And the almost universal response was, why don't we just link the systems and get it over with? So how do you react to that?
Yeah, we're pro linkage. I was going to say one of the definitely not for the UK to, given the UK situation, to comment on what is effectively European trade policy. But if the EU goes ahead with CBAMs, I think there is another way of achieving the kind of global alignment on climate policy, which we're clearly going to need as more and more countries heading for decarbonisation, and that is market linkage, where for countries that have carbon prices. And we're in favour of linkage for two reasons. The first is a straightforward how the power sector operates, that we think it would be effective. It's a bigger, broader market for both the EU and for the UK. That's more liquidity, more price discovery, and easier to attract investment. All of those kinds of things, which are benefiting for our decarbonisation, but also a level playing field in terms of trade if there's linkage. You mentioned at the beginning that we've recently written to the Commission and to the UK Prime Minister on exactly this point, representing industry right across the UK and EU, calling for market linkage. However, I think that's less interesting than talking about the politics. And whenever anyone frames this debate to me, they frame it in terms of Brexit. So I'm really glad that you framed it in terms of international cooperation, because this is a COP year. And I think that there's an opportunity for the UK and the EU to talk about market linkage in the context of delivering against Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and achieve something that both the EU and the UK are hoping to get out of Paris, which is this delivery of international cooperation on carbon markets. So the politics of it is really actually attractive in a year of the COP, and it's largely politics which will make the decision on linkage one way or the other, because the economics are pretty clear. Lastly on that, bureaucratically, it's also more straightforward to link the UK ETS and the EU ETS. And if we're thinking about more aligned carbon pricing globally, this is a good place to start, because our mechanisms are fundamentally similar. So if we can make it work in this context, we can then look to make it work in other carbon markets, which are perhaps more complex to link. So yeah, broadly in favour, but obviously it's a political choice and goes beyond the power sector. But I think industry is pretty clear on what the solution should be. And I think it works with the wider debate inside the EU on things like CBAMs and global alignment.
Or the other way to put it, if you guys can make it work, who can? That would be the flip side of the answer now. But you opened the door on something which is, you said two magic words for me. One of them is COP26. The second one is Article 6. This seems to be putting some pressure on the UK incoming presidency to actually deliver on this. So is this a signal that industry is giving to the Prime Minister and to the presidency?
Yes, I think they're quite sick of hearing from me at this point. We are obviously talking to our government about this. We have been since before the TCA last year. It's something that the UK really wants to lead on carbon pricing at COP. They've put carbon pricing on the table as something that they want to get out of the negotiations globally. It therefore seems sensible to pursue linkage as a signal of intent about global cooperation, and that's the point that we have been making to the government.
Well, I hope that Archie Young is listening in New York. Georgios, you are on coal phase out, and that also coal phase out is revenues, and there's need for resources all around for that. It's a very ambitious thing. The question is, I always read at the weekend, fascinating part of the EFT is how to spend it. And so how do we spend it?
Well, we need to think exactly what is the fundamental thing we're trying to do. I mean, on one hand, we're trying to make polluting technologies more expensive and difficult to use. On the other hand, we should be making clean technologies easier to use and cheaper. So this is related to innovation, therefore. Reaching climate neutrality will require more funding for climate action, including technological innovation. So revenues generated from government auctions of emission allowances should be invested in renewable energy, and energy efficiency technologies should be invested on clean industrial innovation. Talking about the power sector in particular, We all know that PV and wind technologies can today outcompete coal and gas, even with average carbon prices. However, where the role of the EU ETS is critical is when talking about new technologies that can offer long duration storage services and replace the need for gas when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining. So these are the areas that, in my opinion, these funds should be addressing and addressed to.
How do you square this, Georgios? I mean, renewable, new technologies, deployment, research, contract for difference. But there's also a call, quite a strong call, I think, from some of Bea's colleagues sometime and others on international, where the EU wants to be seen and needs to be seen as a leader also in assisting others. Also the social transition, which is probably also in Greece an important element because, you know, this call comes from somewhere. How do you square that circle? I mean, how do you try to?
It's not an easy equation, for sure. We all talk about the just transition, and this is what we're trying to do here in Greece as well. On one hand, we are shutting down the lignite. On the other hand, we are using funds and also some funds from the RRF to create a new economy on these local societies with new activities or a new energy activities towards renewables. We are rolling out big photovoltaic parks. We are rolling out clean waste to energy plants. But this obviously is not enough. So the state here in Greece has rolled out a very big decarbonization plan using the RRF funds in order to transform these local economies into a new reality of the future with new investments. I think the approach that the European Union has taken towards this is the correct approach, and we should embrace it and use it more and more. We have started doing this in Greece. We have a long way in front of us, but then you look of what was happening up to today. Obviously, there was the slow death of lignite year by year with no further investment in these local societies. What is happening today and what is the real change is that we took this brave decision to be a leader on that and go faster. And therefore, of course, we are working today with a very clear plan into creating a new economy in these areas, which was not the case in the past.
Thank you. David, you heard the questions. You may want to reflect to any or all of them. The one thing that I'd like to put to you as well is the fact that, again, there's a package coming on, and I'm happy. I mean, many people are happy with the package because sometimes we've done it in silos. This time it's a package, and hopefully that's going to lead to an easier negotiation and a better outcome. But these packages are interrelated. For instance, you know, if you talk about CBAM free allocation, the whole equation, then you're going to start looking at different type of hedging that you have to deal with. You're going to not only power hedging, which is changing, you're looking at industrial hedging and possibly hedging for CBAM. You know, if you're dealing with an extension of the ETS in some way, shape, or form. So you're going to have this kind of relationship. So anyway, you can choose and pick what you want to address, Dave.
I mean, I think you highlight, Andre, the challenge that we have here. And I don't envy the policymakers, to be honest, because it's very, very hard to find that right balance. I mean, how do you tackle a topic like decarbonisation with the use of CBAM, for example, whilst at the same time trying to encourage free trade and bring the world with you on that journey? It's clearly got lots of challenges, dichotomies within it. But I mean, let's take some examples of the challenge we face. And this is why I think you've got to take a system perspective. If you look at the average steel facility in Europe, I think to convert that, for example, to low carbon energy like hydrogen, you need something in the region of 160 to 200 million euros of investment to achieve that. So that's a significant challenge for steel manufacturers to invest to achieve that. And if they make that sort of investment and produce it there, well, then you've got no mechanism to protect that position because clearly that's a challenge on their balance sheets as companies. Or perhaps you need to incentivize that, but you will end up with this differential with other countries perhaps who aren't taking the same steps, which then creates this problem that we face. So bringing together all the views, I think, is really, really key. And that's why, coming back to Georgios' point in your last question there, it's not just EU ETS that's the lever. We need to think about things like carbon contracts for difference. Not that always go in the favour of companies, sort of you can have plus and minuses here. So you just have stability. It's the stability that allows you to then invest. And I think that's something that's really clear. I also think, coming back to, I guess, the link that links those together is this concept of, we wouldn't need these things if we had, worldwide an EU ETS, an ETS scheme. That wouldn't necessarily be necessary if we could trust in it. But that comes with its challenges, doesn't it? Again, coming back to monitoring and verification, as you have confidence that product X is actually manufactured in that way in a country that's the other side of the world. And do you really believe and trust in that? And that requires a change of mindset. And I think it's the change of mindset that Emma referred to earlier. If you look closer to home, you said it, Andre, and I agree with you. If the UK and the EU can't work out how to link their schemes, then we're really in a difficult spot. So I think it is time, and I think Emma would agree with me, it is time that we stop looking backwards and we look forwards. We don't talk about the disagreements, we talk about the things we agree on. And, we should be agreeing on this topic. And therefore we should find a way, and the COP26 is a great opportunity to do that, for both parties to say, let's find a way to achieve it. And that would be a really strong signal to the world and could be a catalyst that moves people forwards. And I can see that as soon as I said that, the bear put a hand in the air. So she clearly wants to. This might be the moment of agreement or disagreement. So I'll stop talking.
Well, maybe I'm looking for some disagreement somewhere. Bea, you want to do this? You want to maybe react to this? But before, also as part of reaction, I want to ask you if you can come back a little bit and talk to us to the degree that you can at this stage of the game, because we are in the pre-game. The B teams are on the field, and the real game starts in July sometime. But about MSR rebasing LRF, some of the parameters that come into play. I mean, we know about the MSR and the absorption rate and the thresholds and the LRF and the rebasing and the timing on the rebasing. These are things that, again, to the degree that you can give us a little bit of thinking of that would be quite interesting to the audience, I believe.
Thanks a lot. I don't want to monopolize, but I would like to go through 3 points. The first one is the systemic approach. I don't think that is a square the circle, if I could say. It's much more complex than a square and a circle. We go to a systemic transformation of the economy, and this will need absolutely mainstreaming policy and a global approach. So if we look at the revolution of PV and wind that we were talking before, of how the picture looked 25 years ago when I was designing my miserable 1 megawatt, that it was a revolution. And it was a mix of research. It was a mix of the European law, the Renewable Directive. It was a mix of member states' active policies, but it was also transparency to consumer, and it was also internal electricity market. So it was a combination of many things. And I think that this is the approach we will need to do to get the carbon neutrality. Is the full signaling in the market, financing, taxonomy, but also the design of our cities and the design of our houses. So much more complex than that. So fascinating and complex. The point number one on UK, just let me clarify something. We have challenging negotiations in the last years between UK and the EU. It's not a surprise for anybody, but the outcome in a climate perspective is very good. We have climate change for the first time recognized in a trade agreement as an essential element. It means that the violation breaks the deal. Essential element is like weapons of mass destruction. Climate change is the same level. So this, I think, is fantastic. I'm personally very proud of that. Then we have both parties have an economic-wide climate neutrality by 2050. And there are beautiful articles on binding and enforceable non-regression commitment. And we have another last part of the agreement that talks about carbon pricing, and we say that we will both seriously consider this carbon pricing. But just to put it very clear, it's not, we have a very good trade agreement in climate aspects, very good, that it shows both volunteers. So now when the linking will happen, I think that both parties has been extremely busy with domestic agenda and global agenda, and time will come. The last point, Andre, on MSR, this is a more technical, but just to mention that MSR has made it work. It has been an instrument to just correct imbalances. It's working. We promised to have a look this year and to review, and this is what we are doing. So, of course, the parameters, the intake, the cancellation, it will be part of the discussion and it will be there. But allow me to be prudent, because we only have a market that is trading around 1 billion per day. So if I open my mouth too much, I don't want to start creating fluctuations. But the MSR role, it will be recognized in the July package, and that it's working, and does it need some variation, some fine tuning? But it's there to stay. Let's put it like that.
And the rebasing, is this, how do you square the rebasing with LRF, the role of the two? I mean, they're all affecting the cap in some way.
So we will have, I think, an honest analysis of different options. That this is what we are doing. Rebasing, of course, is unfavorably seen by industry. They see it too tough, and in another element is that isn't it natural to adapt the cap to the real emissions? LRF has also pros and cons, better for industry, and from some member states wouldn't like it. So I'm sure that this, whatever we propose, we will have discussions on that, but let's do not lose the focus on objectives. So these are part of the mechanism, but we will need to go to the ambition of around minus 62%.
Well, let's go off the script a little bit. Anyone wants to react in some way or wants to raise any new issue for a moment? David, please.
Yeah, I think I don't think we achieved the disagreement we might have been hoping for in that discussion.
We're trying hard.
We're trying hard, but I suppose, and I think it's rather, it's obviously unfair to ask Bear to come out with numbers and positions at this point in time as we're coming close to announcements. So, and the work continues. But I think from our perspective, I can say that we do think that the linear reduction factor is important, and we'd like to see it increased. Actually, we think that would help. Our analysis says up to around 2.8%. Actually, we also think that rebasing is something that should be considered at the same time. And when we look at the market stability reserve, we like the way that that's being used, and we think that should continue at that 24%, beyond 2023, because that's how we can then continue to use this system as a lever to deliver change. And so I think that if we can get that sort of momentum in what comes out in the middle of the year, then that's really going to help from our perspective as one position.
Emma? You're nodding in agreement.
Yeah, I was nodding furiously. I mean, it's again less for us to say from the UK, but I think the point about the MSR being done alongside the linear reduction factor and rebasing is something that we agree with, and the point that was just made about the 24% continuing past 2023, actually we also agree with. And I think the last thing to say is to avoid, in any mechanism, clunky thresholds or sudden changes undermines the stability of the mechanism. So trying to do all we can to avoid cliff edges, and that applies just as much to, we talked about free allocations earlier in CBAMs, but it also applies here on the thresholds that trigger the MSR. So just whatever we do, investor confidence is best in the mechanism when we've got a clear glide path and the transitions are not clunky.
Georgios, any reaction? I'm not trying to push.
I agree in principle. I mean, keeping the MSR at 24% will be something that we think it's working and will be in the correct direction. But I agree in principle with what has been said already.
Bea, let me come back to you for a moment. I mean, you are the commission. Invariably, people are turning to you one way or another. But we started by talking. A second topic that we discussed was about extension and new areas and how it should be accomplished. A number of sectors were mentioned. Waste was not mentioned. Why is waste still out? It sounds like a UK link.
Well, I mean, waste, you know very well that the effort sharing regulation includes waste, includes agriculture, includes building, includes transport and a small industry. So waste is currently part of the effort sharing and is part, of course, of the waste regulation from an environmental point of view. So I didn't mention explicitly why I think that it is part of the discussion and it's part of what the impact assessment that you will read with pleasure the 400 pages in July, I'm sure. So the waste is part of that, but I think that concentrated on the major sectors because agriculture is a huge sector, but of course there is regulated in other houses, let's put it like that, and it has a clear regulation, which is a little bit, even if different nature of the regulation. Waste is also under both effort sharing and under environmental regulation. So it's not that it's out of anything, it's that the considerations we are having on the possible extension is probably better to focus on building and transport and leave the existing regulation reinforced with the effort sharing. Let's do not forget that we are going also to present an effort sharing upgrading plus in July, so that not consider this small industry or waste or agriculture. But decision, you will see the decision there. It's part of the debate, and it's also under other regulations. So it's not an abandon. It's not like maritime that, well, I will not call it abandon, but maritime didn't have a decarbonization regulation. It's not the case of waste.
Let me go back to something what Emma said earlier about negative emissions and does it have a place? We will need negative emissions at some point. I think we're going to get to hard to decarbonize sectors. We're going to get to maybe beyond 2050. We're going to have to start doing more. What's any reaction from anybody else? I mean, Emma's kind of put the flag in the ground, but anyone else that would like to react at all to negative emissions, because that could play an important role. And again, it's a new thing in the ETS in a way. It's got a little place now, but how do you feel about that? Emma, do you want to pick it up and give us a little bit more of your thinking on negative emission, because you raised it?
Yeah, and perhaps the kind of this idea of other sectors and which are appropriate. I mean, I think stepping back a moment, we've all seen the roadmaps to 2050 and you know how we have to decarbonize across the economy. I think the power sector's underway, moving through heat and transport, then to more difficult to abate sectors, and then to international sectors like aviation and maritime, which are trickier. And we've talked also about the fact that carbon pricing is a tool, and that probably for each of these sectors of the economy, you'll need to do a mix of things, whether that's, you know, regulatory nudges or targets or incentives or carbon pricing. And the reason that we put negative emissions on the table is that the difference between 1.5 and 2 degree pathways is largely one about sequestration. We know we need more negative emissions than we thought we did. I think Georges at the beginning said we're on track for 2.4, and we're only going to turn that around with maximum mitigation, but then also negative emissions. And they are less regulated, less robust. I think someone's talked about market standards and transparency. And so there's something about that there, being able to understand what they are and put some standards around them. But I think more importantly, recognizing their value in decarbonisation, so including them in our thinking on whatever mechanisms we're using. So that's why I proposed it. I think the other thing I want to say, though, is even within carbon pricing, there are reviews underway about where that carbon price sits in the economy. So some of these sectors may need a carbon price like agriculture, but the debate in the UK, for example, is whether that comes in the form of, say, a carbon tax, which is administered by member states or locally, or in the case of the UK, by the UK Exchequer. And there's a big review going on, not just in the UK, but internationally, of how our economies function and where in the economy we pay for carbon. And I think that's important to remember too, because the ETS is one carbon pricing mechanism, but there are other ways you can reflect the carbon price in your economy. And for things like agriculture, it might be more appropriate for it to be done outside the ETS. So that's just a thought. But so, yes, on negative emissions, it's an early stage thought from us, but they're going to be valuable as we decarbonise. So we should be including them in our mechanisms and our thinking.
At least in certainly something to reflect on. Certainly at this critical moment with a package like this, something to reflect on. If there's no other reaction, I was going to turn back to David to ask him to kind of give us his conclusions, what he took back from this, and address anything in particular that he may want to that has been missed out in the current discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I mean, I think we've had a very comprehensive discussion, and I note that we didn't particularly disagree, and I take that to be a good thing, actually, because I think we all recognise and realise that the EU ETS is one of the tools that we can use to achieve the ambitious goals that we have set in front of us. And I think, as George just said, we are sort of at a moment in time. We're coming out of this pandemic. We see that with the Green Deal. We see the opportunities around the world, the change in administration in the US, the moves from China. There is a momentum towards trying to achieve the goals that we set ourselves, even if, as has been quite rightly said, those goals perhaps don't go far enough for some at the moment. Nevertheless, there is a momentum there. And as such, something like an emissions trading scheme is one of the ideal tools that people can use around the world, countries can use around the world to achieve the change that they seek. And so I think the EU ETS is, for my mind, a perfect example of how you can use something like this, the scheme. If we can achieve and build on the very positive discussions around the climate from the Brexit negotiations, for example, and look forward to linking two schemes, I think, again, that sets an example and a beacon to the world. And that gives us an opportunity. This change that we're seeking is going to take some time. We've spoken about revolution, and indeed it is revolution in some respects, but also it's an evolution. We talk about that in our company because, you know, we need stability. We need some form of change over time, which allows us to deliver and change. So I think the emission trading scheme that we've got that's being reviewed at the moment is the ideal tool for us to use in Europe, but also for others to look at and reflect on and think, how can we use this as another lever to deliver the change that we all seek to move to a greener world? So I'm quite heartened by the discussion. I'm glad that actually we've got people who really agree to an extent. I'm glad that we've got people who are pushing forwards for stronger goals. And I think that only bodes well for the future. So I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed listening to the different perspectives, but also particularly the common interest, which for me is very important in these days. We're coming out of polarised times, and I think we should be looking to find the things that we agree on and build on those, because that delivers success in the end.
Thank you, David, and thank you to Bea, Emma, and Georges as well. I think it's, in spite of our best efforts, I think there's been agreement all along on most cases. Maybe there are a few ideas that need to be reflected on and thought upon. But now it is up to Bea and her colleagues, and we will wait quite anxiously for some reading the 400 plus pages, dense pages, that they are spending their evening, their nights now putting together. And again, thanks to Uniper for sponsoring this session, and look forward to seeing you again in some other session. Thank you all.
Big thanks to you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.